what I've learned from the scientific and the spiritual perspective both support this idea that time is not linear as we perceive it. We perceive it that way, but in actuality, it's not linear. There are infinite timelines, and we hop back and forth between these different timelines, depending not only on our vibration and our energy, but also our actions. The actions that we take are so powerful. That's why aligned action is like one of the best things that you can start implementing, and that is taking action when it feels right, following those little nudges, and again, just being open and curious with it. Welcome to Alignment Adventures. This is a podcast where we explore what it means to live a fulfilling, aligning, and present life. I'm your host, Lindsay Tanner, and I am so grateful that you are here. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Alignment Adventures. I am so excited and grateful that you are here with me today. And I think I have my trippiest, most mind-blowing, mind-melting episode to date. We are continuing with this series I've been doing starting back in December, where I'm connecting science and spirituality when it comes to different concepts like the nature of reality, brain states, how we're all connected. And today we are talking about time itself. Like, how does time actually function? Is it an illusion? Is it not? Is it linear? Is it not? Such interesting information that I have uncovered and hopefully bringing to you in a cohesive way. But do know that at any point, please stop, rewind, pause, re-listen, come back and listen again if you need to, because a lot of these concepts are just mind-blowing. Like, they break your brain and they take time to sink in. So before we get into all of that, I want to give you just a little bit of a life update. As you know from previous episodes, I've been feeling the nudge to slow down on the podcast, and I've been doing just that. I'm really trying to practice what I preach over here, and I've just been living and being and journaling and meditating and having fun, and of course, watching Arlo and chasing around Arlo most of the time, but doing all those things as well in the in-between. And also, huge update, as I've started going to therapy, that really flowed beautifully. So many guests on here have talked about therapy. We've even had many therapists and psychologists on here, like my dear friend Demi Garcia and my cousin's wife, who I consider just my own cousin, Katerina Ament. And we just know the power of therapy. There's so much power in going to someone that is completely unbiased, has no idea what's going on in your life, and you can bring these things to them, and they can just be a beautiful mirror for you and give you some really great tools, and also just help you see things that maybe you already know or you don't know, and just shine some light on those things. I've only had one session so far, and already so many pings, so many good insights, and I'm going to continue doing it as long as it feels aligning. So how that flowed is I actually got a free month of therapy through my yoga insurance as being a yoga instructor. So I took that as a sign to finally do it. I've been talking about doing it since I went to therapy almost 10 years ago. So it's felt so good. There's times, honestly, where I'm I know better. I can talk myself through these things, or journal through these things, which definitely helps. But the power of going to another human and just explaining all the things that are on your mind and your heart, and having them reflect back to you the things that they're seeing, is so powerful. So if you're feeling the nudge, please go and do that. Also, I'm currently reading and almost done. I'm on the last chapter of Small Creatures Such as We by Sasha Sagan. And that book actually inspired the topic for today. I was reading one of the chapters and they were talking about relativity, and I was like, time. We need to talk about time. It is time to talk about time. I've been taking so many notes with all of my nonfiction books on my phone, like a true nerd, and it is so aligning. She is the daughter of Carl Sagan, who wrote The Cosmos. So maybe I'll recap my takeaways from that book, because she does a beautiful job bringing together science and spirituality and explaining how we celebrate different things on planet Earth, all the way from birth to the different seasons to death, to harvest to all the things. And she just shares so many different perspectives, and it's been really fun to read that. Also, along with what we're talking about today, I recently watched Oppenheimer. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie or not, but I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would. I was almost let Steven watch it without me because I was like, I don't know, is that my jam? There's so much about Oppenheimer I didn't know. He was a quantum physicist. He brought quantum physics, quantum mechanics to America, actually. So they talk a ton about quantum physics. I even posted on my Instagram. If you love the quantum physics talk at the beginning of this movie, please go and check out my science and spirituality episodes. So if you haven't listened to those yet, go and listen to them. I will link them in the show notes. There have been quite a few. They're not in order. They're kind of scattered throughout, but I will link them all if you want to go back and listen to some of them. But he also encounters Heisenberg, which we talked about in the very first Science and Spirituality episode, which I found so interesting because he was involved in World War II. And then also Einstein is in the movie, which I found very interesting. And we're going to be talking a lot about Einstein today. So I've really just been practicing following what feels exciting and fun and inspiring and releasing the rest. That was one of my huge intentions for this year. Like, I've just been putting so much pressure on myself. And I think women in general can relate to this, especially mothers, but women in general, as we just try to be all the things, do all the roles, be all the things to everybody. And you can't always do that. You can do anything, but not everything. One of my favorite quotes. So just been good for me to recenter myself, focus on my family, focus on what is exciting to me, and just like follow my passion and see where that leads. So that has also led me to be spending less time on the podcast and even a little bit more time on YouTube. So go and check out my personal YouTube channel if you haven't already. I did a really fun recap of another mind-blowing book I read, The Fifth Agreement. So go and check that out if you are curious about that book. And honestly, sometimes I just feel like I've said all the things I needed to say over here. And I know that's not true because I'm always growing and evolving. And here I am bringing you another topic that I feel inspired to bring you. But there are times where I'm like, I have 160 plus episodes of information. And in this time and space, I feel like I've said what I needed to say. And maybe that will change, but I don't know. We'll just see how things unfold. Again, I'm not putting any pressure on anything. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for always tuning in. Thank you for sharing the episodes with people that you think would find these episodes interesting and helping the podcast grow. I so appreciate it, but I'm really just letting life flow through me. So that is a perfect lead in to today's topic. So let's talk about time. And of course, we're going to look at it from the scientific perspective and then the spiritual perspective. And then I'll draw my own conclusions. And I encourage you to draw your own conclusions. And I would love for you to share them with me on Instagram. So let's talk about time. So with time, we can all agree that we perceive time all the time. Pun intended there. We see the seasons changing. Like right now, it is totally giving us spring vibes here in the Midwest. It's been beautiful outside. It's a little rainy today, but you can just feel spring in the air. Seasons changing feel so good. We get older. We notice our children growing. We notice ourselves getting older, whether we want to notice that or not. We notice plants growing, the sun rising, the sun setting, etc. We have constant reminders of things changing, of time passing. And you know that I am always striving to be more present. That is one of the key pillars to this podcast, exploring what it means to live an aligning, fulfilling, and present life. So exploring this topic from a scientific and spiritual perspective really satiated my mind and soul. Like bringing together the two just makes my mind and soul so happy. I love seeing how what we've discovered from science and what the spiritual teachers are saying, how they connect and how they align. It's just like the most interesting thing ever to me right now. So along with time, we can all, I'm guessing, say that we've experienced distortions in time. Like think of your last vacation or trip, that it seemed like it went by really fast, but also when you got back, you felt like you were gone for a long time. Like both were true. You feel like it was a short vacation, but you were also gone for a long time. Or maybe you've experienced deja vu, where you feel like you've been in this situation before. I know when I experienced deja vu, it's super strong, but also super short. and it doesn't last very long at all, but it's totally disorienting. Or as a parent, I know a common saying is that the days are really long, but the years go really fast. Time distorting again. Do you feel like time is flying? That is a very common saying in our society. Or do you feel like time is passing super slow when you're waiting for something like water to boil, or the light to turn green, or your food to come out when you're at a restaurant and super hungry, or when you're sitting in class? I remember, if you're not a student anymore, what it was like sitting in class waiting for that bell to ring. Like that was the slowest that time would pass. Or personally, I feel like time moves the fastest when Arlo is sleeping or when we're doing something really fun. Of course, time feels like it's flying by. So these are all perceptions of time distortions, and we're going to try to explain those today. So from a scientific perspective, let's talk about Einstein and the theory of relativity. I'm going to do my best to explain this in the simplest terms, but again, stop, rewind, re-listen if you need to. So Einstein, back in the early 20th century, I always get confused with my centuries, but they're classified by like the year at the end of the century. So at the beginning of the 1900s, the beginning of the 20th century, Einstein was beginning to study light, even from an early age. He was just like super interested in light and how it traveled. And what's interesting about Einstein is he was very creative for a scientist. Like he did a lot of thought experiments, which kind of confused me at first, but I think it's basically like playing out the experiment in your mind according to what we know about the laws of physics. So something that he started to question is, do we perceive light the same from different frames of references? Like someone standing still as opposed to someone moving on a train or a boat, they're perceiving light ever so differently. And how we know this now is because we know that the speed of light is a constant. It doesn't change. It is super fast. If you didn't know, light travels at 186,000 miles per second. That is such a massive number. It's just like hard for our minds to comprehend that. But just to give you a little like flavor of how fast that is, since the sun is 92.264 million miles away, it takes light from the sun about 8 minutes and 20 seconds to get to Earth. So that just kind of gives you a frame of reference of how fast light moves, super fast, and the sun is super far away. So if we know that the speed of light is a constant, what else can be changing if we're perceiving it differently depending on our frame of reference? Well, Einstein started to question time, and this was radical for Einstein, hard for him to accept too, but he started to hypothesize, can time run differently for someone moving versus someone standing still? And he came to the conclusion through his thought experiments, which I will leave links to the references if you want to see these explained even deeper, that two events are not simultaneous to all observers, even if they are simultaneous to some. In other words, the simultaneous events as seen by one observer could occur at a different time from a different perspective. So basically what he's saying is time is relative. You probably heard that saying before, but time is relative. It is not a constant. And that itself is mind-blowing because all of us are experiencing time, like we said before, right? Like we are all experiencing this ever-changing time passing day in, day out. So how could time not be a constant? So according to the theory of relativity, the faster you move, the slower time moves compared to someone who's just stationary. This is the special theory of relativity. And there's another type we're going to talk about here in a second when we bring in gravity. So science can agree on this. Time is not constant. I have that highlighted, bolded in my notes. Now we're all familiar with his famous equation, E equals mc squared. Let me break that down for you a little bit more so you can fully understand this. But basically, the energy of an object is its mass times the speed of light squared. So the energy of objects is massive because the speed of light is a massive number. So like I mentioned earlier, 10 years later, Einstein expanded his theory of special relativity to the theory of general relativity to account for gravity. So when we bring gravity into the equation, we're now thinking of time and space as this sort of fabric. The best analogy I saw for it as think of space as an aquarium and time as the water. The fish cannot move through the aquarium without the water. We cannot move through space without time in our physical reality. And the space-time fabric can be altered by massive objects, because that's what gravity is. Like, all matter exerts forces on each other, but of course massive objects like planets and the moon and the sun exert more gravity because they have more mass. So think of a bowling ball in the middle of a trampoline. Like, the trampoline is a space-time fabric, and when you put the bowling ball on the trampoline, it kind of bends it distorts it a little bit. So let me give you an example to really put this in perspective when we talk about the theory of general relativity. So imagine a 15-year-old leaves her high school traveling at the speed of light for 5 years. So that is from her perspective, which how cool would that be as a 15-year-old to be an astronaut and you're traveling at the speed of light, right? Which we technically can't do yet, or we haven't figured out yet, but who knows? Science is always changing. So this is theoretical, but from her perspective, she leaves for space at the speed of light for 5 years. So when the 15-year-old astronaut gets back to her school, she would have only aged those 5 years that she spent traveling. But her classmates, however, would be 65 years old. 50 years would have passed on the much slower moving planet of Earth, because Earth is just moving at its normal speed, which is still pretty fast around the sun, right? But it's much slower than the speed of light. So she would have aged 5 years, but everyone else on Earth has aged 50 years. Again, pause, take some time to think about that. Let that soak in. That is the theory of general relativity. That's relativity, folks, to quote one of my favorite movies, Interstellar. So let me give you another example. And again, this one is based on a fictional movie, but I think still does a good job of showing how relativity affects time, because time is not constant. Time is relative, which is what we're talking about here. So if you've seen the movie Interstellar, without giving too much away, they are traveling to different planets to just trying to find a new home for Earth. So they go to this planet called Miller's Planet because one of the scientists goes there to check it out first. His name or last name is Miller. It is pretty close to a massive black hole, and 1 hour on this planet is 7 years on Earth because the gravity of this massive black hole distorts time that much. And one of the other astronauts, as they're explaining this, he says, that's relativity, folks. Just so interesting, so mind-blowing. So to reiterate our point here, time is relative. Time can be distorted. So now that we've looked at time on a larger scale, bringing these massive objects with massive gravity and traveling at the speed of light, which is also a massive number, and how that can distort time. Let's bring it back to the quantum physics level. So on the tiny, tiny, tiny level of atoms, like we talked about in our first episode, Connecting Science and Spirituality, which is episode 154. Again, I'll link it in the show notes. We talked about electron wave functions. From what we've observed in electrons, they exist in this cloud of probability, they are multiple places at once, and it isn't until they are observed that they collapse into one spot or into a wave function. So this suggests that there are multiple timelines playing out at once, and it isn't until the observer comes in that we, kind of collapse into the one timeline, which we'll talk about a little bit more later when we bring in these spiritual connections. It's almost like time is this dimension that we're traveling through, these different dimensions of time. And that is supported here with that quantum physics, the quantum mechanics experiments that we talked about before. So what else do we have to say about time from a scientific perspective? Honestly, I think physicists are just trying to figure it out, and they are almost as confused as we are. Like, we're still discovering these new things all the time. But some physicists propose that time does not exist really at all, but it's just our perception of time that exists, like our sense of time that we talked about before. And again, this is why like different data that physicists are collecting can be so inconclusive and confusing. Like all the experiments I've mentioned before, like they're just almost too much for the brain to accept. But think about it this way, like even the past can become an illusion. And I've talked about that many times on here before. Like every time we recall a past event, we have to reconstruct it in our mind, which can lead to like an alteration of the details. Like every time we remember it or every time we retell a story, it's just a little bit different. And also, according to the other people who were there, you might all have different interpretations or perceptions of that event, which makes sense because we all have different personalities, experiences, vibrations, moods. Maybe you were focused on something different than the other person was, so you all have your own interpretation of past events. What's interesting is that we use similar parts of our brain to remember the past as we do to imagine the future. So interesting, because if you think about it, we need these skills as humans to survive. We need to be able to learn from our past, and we need to be able to prepare for the future. That's like an evolutionary skill that we have learned over time. Also, think of babies. Like babies truly have no perception of time. They live in the eternal now, which I'm always trying to do. And that's why they can go from being upset to happy to hungry to satiated so fast, because they are eternally in the now. They have no concept of time. And eventually they learn that perception of time. But I believe that is also why it can be so difficult to teach your toddler to be patient, because they don't understand time and how it passes. They want their food or their bottle or their show right now, right? These are all things that I'm definitely in the thick of and definitely apply to me right now. And you know, it's funny, this also applies to like you telling them to put on their coat or to go to sleep, because they don't know like the consequences of the future. They're in the now. They don't know that if they don't put on their coat, they're going to be cold outside. Or if they don't go to sleep now, they're going to be tired later, because they're in the eternal now. So interesting to think about. Okay, I want to share this quote from this BBC article. Again, I will link it in the show notes. But I just thought it was really interesting to shed some light on how we perceive time. They said, "Of course, you could argue that it doesn't really matter whether we perceive time accurately according to the laws of physics. On a daily basis, we can carry on walking without needing to remember that, however flat the world feels while you're on the ground, it's actually spherical. We still talk of the sun rising in the morning and setting in the evening, even though we know that it is the earth and not the sun that is moving. Our perceptions don't keep up with the science, and we can only create our everyday experience of the world using the senses we possess." So I think those are just interesting points to keep in mind when it comes to our perception of time. We only have our limited senses when it comes to perceiving our world. And we still call it sunrise and sunset, even though we know the sun isn't moving at all. We are the ones moving. It's just a good reminder to expand your ideas around this, like to be open and curious, because even though we're observing one thing in our physical reality, there could be so much more to it that we just don't understand yet. Okay. Let's get into the spiritual side of things. And here's where it gets even more trippy. If your mind isn't already blown, like it's going to be soup here pretty soon. Or maybe, you already know all this stuff. Who knows? I shouldn't make preconceived judgments, right? So I'm going to bring in the perception of time from a few different spiritual teachers, ones that I've mentioned on here many, many times. And then I'm also going to bring it back to what I've learned in my conclusions. So let's talk about Bashar's view of time. I'm not going to get into who Bashar is or research him if you want to, but he is definitely one of my favorite channels, one of my favorite spiritual teachers. He is so concise in his teachings. As you guys know, one of my intentions for this year is following Bashar's formula, which I'm not going to repeat. Again, look it up, but I just love his teachings. And I think I'm going to spend each morning like listening to a clip of his to just remind me of my truth, because it's so easy to forget why I have this podcast, right? So Bashar's view on time is that everything exists all at once. Time is an illusion, and that there are different versions of Earth that exist right now. And we don't change the world, but rather we change our vibration, and that navigates us to parallel versions of Earth that align with our vibration. I have wow written after that, and I'm just going to pause for a moment so you can take that in. Basically, what he's saying is that time is an illusion. We only have the now, just the now moment that we are experiencing from different perspectives. And if you listen to even more of his teachings, he talks about how we are constantly going through these different frames of reality, like millisecond by millisecond. And we're just constantly shifting through these different versions of Earth based on our vibration and our energy. Now, I know what my ego would do. It would panic and be like, I've got to get my energy up so I'm not in this like crappy world, right? Don't be a perfectionist about it. Just work on yourself and don't worry about the rest. But this is just a reminder not to feed your fears. Like when I see news stories about like possible this or possible that, like things that haven't even happened, I'm like, no, that is not my reality. I do not choose that timeline. And that even connects with the book that I just read. And I talked about the video summary that I did of the fifth agreement. They talk about that. Like you don't have to take on other people's agreements. You create your own reality. Something we talk about here in every single episode. But this is another way of explaining that as we navigate through different versions of Earth based on our vibration, because we're all energy at an atomic level. Okay, let me make some other points with Bashar's teachings here for a second. So we are navigating through different versions of Earth, different versions of reality, either intentionally or unintentionally. So you're either going towards an Earth that you fear because you're placing so much attention on that fear, like I just mentioned, or you're going towards a version of Earth that you prefer because you're focusing on what you want to see more of, which Abraham Hicks talks about a lot too. Focus on what you want rather than what you don't want. Another thing that Bashar said, and I found this so interesting, which I'm trying to use another word than interesting, but whatever. All of this is interesting, mind-blowing, mind-melting. He said that when you live in the moment, which is really all we ever have, everything you ever experience is a series of different now moments, just from different points of view. You only have that one moment, which is now. Take that in for a second. When you are truly living in the moment, which is fleeting, by the way, and that's okay, you create less differentiation between each moment, and you're not creating the experience of time. Have you felt that before? We talked about that in the beginning, that distortion of time when you're really in the zone, which we talked about many times in here. Maybe you're doing something on your alignment list, something you just love to do. Time is not passing because you're not creating the experience of time, because you're living in the now, the now, the now, the now. And again, this can be so tricky to do, so do not beat yourself up about this. This is why I have a whole podcast dedicated to being present. But I don't want your ego to take this and run with it. But Bashar also said that when this happens, we don't actually age. Like when we're living in the moment, we're not creating time, so we're not aging. This is why people who really are good at being present seem ageless or eternal or timeless. Again, don't let your egos take that and run with it and try to be a perfectionist with living in the moment. It's a constant practice, right? And we're constantly ebbing and flowing with that feeling, and that's okay. But how interesting. Here's the fountain of youth right here. It's just living in the moment. That is such a beneficial practice, not only for your health, for your mental health, emotional health, physical health, but now for aging is living in the moment. It's just such good stuff, such good stuff. Another thing that Bashar said is that when we have that fleeting feeling of presence, we can sometimes experience time forwards and backwards, which makes us feel like we've already done that certain thing, which is the experience of deja vu. That makes sense to me because when I do experience deja vu, it's pretty rare, but when I do, it's super strong for like a few seconds and then it goes away. So I guess that kind of makes sense that I was experiencing that timeline or that segment of time forwards and then backwards to create the illusion that I'd already done it. Like, it's such a familiar feeling. Like, I've been in this time and space before. It's almost indescribable. Let me know if you've experienced that before or what it's like for you, please. I find deja vu so interesting. Or another thing that can cause the experience of deja vu is we have this sort of template in between the physical and non-physical dimensions where we almost kind of like create templates for our reality. Think about like intention setting, or again, getting in certain vibrations. Maybe you've called something in a dream or in a meditation or whatever it may be, and you've created that in that kind of template space between the physical and non-physical. So when it happens in the physical world, it's like you've already done it. You've already created that because you put so much energy and intention towards it. That can be another causation of deja vu, according to Bashar. Such interesting stuff. Again, I love his teachings. What I encourage you to do if you find this interesting is just Google a topic that you are interested in from Bashar's view. So maybe it could be death from Bashar, or parenting from Bashar, or whatever it may be. Just go and be open and curious. He is one of my favorite teachers, and I'm really hoping to see him in person this year. I'm really hoping that can happen. So let's put that out into the ethers, put that out into my template that I can go and experience Bashar's energy in person this year or sometime soon. Okay, let's talk about how Abraham Hicks sees time. Now, I will say this, Abraham Hicks is not as concise as Bashar. And again, I'm not going to go into who Abraham Hicks is. I have a whole episode explaining that, and I will link it in the show notes when I went and actually saw Abraham Hicks in person. That was such a transformative experience. But what they say about time, specifically divine timing, is that when you are in vibrational alignment, when you're living in alignment, when you're feeling good, when you are just doing the things that feel right in each moment and working on going up the emotional scale, all key components of Abraham's teachings, you start to create synchronicities and you start to pay attention to what's going on around you, and basically just like the timelines start to work out perfectly and things start to show up in your reality to help you work towards the things that you've been manifesting. And that's what we're all about over here. It's just like following your alignment, following those things that feel right to you to raise your vibration. So I couldn't find any like specific clips where they're explaining time, or I even looked back through my notes to the Abraham Hicks event that I went to. Nothing specific on time and how it functions, but one thing they do teach for sure is that your vibration affects the timing of your life. So just working on yourself, doing the things that you love, being more present, letting go of expectation, letting go of the how is not your job, gets you into alignment, and synchronicities start to show up and timelines collapse, which aligns with what physics was saying, with the electrons in the cloud of possibilities, and aligns with what Bashar is saying. Now let's talk about Eckhart Tolle. Now, I have read 2 of his books, The Power of Now and A New Earth. So The Power of Now is obviously all about living in the present moment and how powerful that can be. So I just want to recommend that book. If you're into this stuff, you will love both of those books, but especially The Power of Now. But obviously, a major part of his teachings is that all suffering comes from not being in this moment, whether it's anxiety about the future or worrying about the past. It's being in the now moment that we source all of that internal power. And there's so much more to that. So just go read The Power of Now. I was talking about this book with my cousin Sean, and she said she's going to reread it like every year at the same time and like get different things from it. And it's so true. When you reread profound books like that, you grab something different every single time. So that's one of my intentions this year, is to reread one of his books, but I'm also reading a ton of books this year. So we'll see if that comes about. So that is what some of the spiritual teachers are saying. And here's what I've learned. What I've learned from the scientific and the spiritual perspective both support this idea that time is not linear as we perceive it. We perceive it that way, but in actuality, it's not linear. There are infinite timelines, and we hop back and forth between these different timelines depending not only on our vibration and our energy, but also our actions. The actions that we take are so, so powerful. That's why aligned action is like one of the best things that you can start implementing. And that is taking action when it feels right, following those little nudges. And again, just being open and curious with it. Another thing I want to bring up, and I have a whole episode devoted to this as well, but I want to bring it back up to the conversation of time, is this idea that we aren't flowing through time, like past, present, and future, but time is flowing through us. And that makes sense, right? Because all we have is the now, according to science and the spiritual teachers. All we have is the now, and time is flowing through us. So what is meant for us will come to us in divine timing. Our job is to just stay in alignment the best that we can. We're not going to do it perfectly. There will be ebbs and flows. We're here to learn, but time is flowing through us. And it's just so interesting. If you want more on that idea, go back to episode 145. Some other things I want to mention from this BBC article, which was so interesting. It was all about like our perception of time. It was just changing how we think about time. Instead of considering the past, present, and future as a straight line, we can look at our memories as sort of like this library and a resource for us to think about when it comes to the future. And this is crucial because, of course, we want to be present as much as we can, but in physical reality, there are times when we have to think about the past and we have to think about the future. But don't let those memories haunt you. What I found so interesting is that this idea that we kind of distort the past is not a bad thing, because that ability to distort the past and remember it in different ways helps us prepare for different futures and helps us imagine different futures. They said, for example, that Aristotle described memories not as archives of our lives, but as tools for imagining the future. So don't let the past be one of the chains, one of the things that holds you back. I know we can beat ourselves up so much about something we said or something that we did. Use that to propel you into your future, to create a future that you want intentionally. Like Bashar said, we are intentionally hopping back, or unintentionally, hopping back and forth between different timelines and versions of Earth. And you have power and control over that based on what you do with what you learn from your past and your present, right? You get to decide what you do with that information. And I think in this time and space, the way that we perceive time is never going to perfectly match up with the latest discoveries in physics. I think as time goes on, maybe that will change. Our perceptions will change. We can change how we think about time and how we consider time. If you have this idea in your mind or this story in your mind that you never have enough time, then that's going to be a reality. You're going to feel like you never have enough time. Or if you feel like time is moving so slowly, that is going to be a reality, right? You get to choose the story you have around time, and time is not relative. It kind of bends and shapes depending on so many factors, including our intention and our vibration and our actions. So I just want you to remember the power that you have when it comes to time. You are not a slave to time. You are an integral part in how time is perceived, and you get to rewrite that story if you want to. You get to change the story you have around time, and you will see that start to reflect in your own reality. Again, be open and curious with all of this. Be playful with it. Just see how changing your ideas around time will start to manifest in your reality. And just to help your mind get on board here, we defy space and time all the time with technology, right? You are listening to this in a different time and space, and people will be able to listen to this or watch me on YouTube or watch different movies until eternity, right? We are defying time and space with technology, and I think that's only going to start to get stronger and stronger. Another thing I had on here that I wanted to talk about when it relates to time is the Mandela effect, but that's a beast unto itself, so I think that's going to be a separate episode, but Google it if you're interested. It definitely has to do with time and different timelines. All right, my loves, I hope you found all of that interesting and useful, and like I said, go back and listen to this again if you need to. I just want to leave you with a few more takeaways as I kind of wrap this up in a beautiful present for your mind, for your soul. what all of this comes back to, what all of this points to, is just coming back to our presence again and again and again, coming back to this moment. And it is a practice. It is a fleeting feeling, and that is okay. But something I want you to, again, experiment with is allowing yourself not to experience the passage of time. Like, just be curious with that as you're being in the moment, as you're doing things you love. Reflect afterwards and be like, did I just experience and allow myself to experience not having the passage of time? Now we know that that is proven scientifically and supported by the spiritual teacher. So such an interesting thing to consider. Time is on our side when we are living in the moment. And time is on our side when we're living in alignment. And time is on our side when we raise our vibration and do the things that we are passionate about. Again, like I said a million times already in this podcast and in this episode, it's a practice. And it's just something that you're going to figure out in your own way, and something that I've actually been doing recently, because when I'm doing something mundane, like emptying the dishwasher or cleaning the house or driving, unless I have like a podcast on to entertain my mind, which I love to do, I will have the randomest thoughts about the past and the future, like past things that happened that I haven't thought about in decades, or future things that might happen. So something that helps me come back to the present moment is just really focusing on what I'm doing. Like if I'm loading the dishwasher, I'm like, wow, how amazing that I get to put all these dishes in this magical box and it will clean and disinfect them for me, and I can put them all back. Like, that is magical. Or you can really tune into your senses. Like, what do you taste? What do you smell? What do you hear? And you can kind of create an experience for yourself in each one of those moments. Or you can put in a podcast and think about these brain melting concepts too. Or in each one of those scenarios, you can just think about how grateful you are for whatever it is that you are doing, or make it a game of how you can find the gratitude in that situation. Gratitude is such a beautiful way to ground yourself in the present moment. Like with everything that I share on here, I really just want to remind you of the power that you hold within your own perspective, within your own existence, within your own presence. You get to determine all these things. You have free will, and you get to decide how you perceive and experience things. So please let me know your thoughts about this episode on Instagram at Lindsay with an A, M as in Michelle Tanner. That is my Instagram handle. Or you can email me at hello@Lindsay with an A, M as in Michelle Tanner.com. Just let me know your thoughts. Like, this is trippy stuff. Like I said in the beginning, this is probably my trippiest episode yet. And if you know anyone that would be interested in this topic, or maybe you just have this nudge to share it with a certain person, please do that right now. Just copy the link, text it to them. I am eternally grateful, and I just trust those nudges that you get. Also, if you are new here, please subscribe. We have new episodes sometime. I want to say every week, but it's not every week. I just let them flow now, and that feels so aligned. So again, thank you for sticking around and for being here. I just think this is some of the most powerful work we can be doing here. And also, if you haven't, please go and rate and review the podcast either on Apple iTunes or Spotify. If you are listening on either of those platforms, it doesn't take much time at all, even though time is relative. It takes less than 30 seconds, and I'm so appreciative of that when you do those things. So I'm sending you all so much love, all the gratitude. I hope you can feel it through the space-time continuum. And of course, I will see you in the next episode of Alignment Adventures.